Okay, so my name is Vallejo, and I'm going to talk about adventures. The purpose of this presentation is I was sitting down for a long time, and that's not me. I was playing sports in high school, I was an athlete, I was running around, and then I was in a career that I loved, but I was sitting all day long. And I thought to myself, there's a big world out there that is ready to be explored, and I don't want to be a Google explorer. I want to be an actual explorer. A lot of us, we have a project, we'll look up reference, and we'll go to Street View, and we'll do all that. I wondered if there was a way that I can go and see things. So if that's any of you out here, that you have athletic interests, adventure interests, hopefully this presentation can give you insight into my journey and perhaps encourage you to explore the world, because it's a beautiful one that we have. Okay, so let's start with who am I? So briefly, I am an illustrator out of Detroit. Do we have any Michigan people here? Some? Actually, look for a bunch of people with CCS on this shirt. I can't believe it. Like, I've met 2 people accidentally today, like in the last half hour. They're like, yeah, I'm from Detroit. I'm like, wow, cool. Visit Detroit, it's fun. So I'm from the city, and I teach at the College for Creative Studies as an associate professor. I work in the publishing industry as well. So this was my first kids book here, Jazz Day. I did this project with Neil Gaiman for the Folio Society called The Nancy Boys. I do projects like this. And I like to experiment. I like to make marks. A lot of my work is very traditional, although I finish a lot digitally. So if you want to get a little insight into how to develop but foster the creative spirit and the experimentation in your work, tomorrow I am giving a talk, so a little plug on that at noon. But this is giving a little insight and context into what I do. Okay, what we're here for. Because if this is Alaska, I'm from way down here in Detroit, I thought that nature was gray sludge. That's all I knew over in the wintertime, and I didn't travel much as a kid. I was city to the core, right? And eventually, after graduating from Ringling College, I landed in Austin, Texas, and I had my buddy Andy. We both were wondering, is there a way that we can travel and have someone pay for it? So we were hounding all these residencies, and he sent me one. He's like, dude, I know you like adventure stuff. This isn't for me, but you might be interested in this. And it was called Voices of the Wilderness. I assume you're here because you're interested in that type of thing, so I encourage everyone to apply. I'm not getting paid for this, but Voices of the Wilderness is an Alaskan program, and they connect you with a wildlife group all over Alaska. You have to write your physical capabilities, which I think is awesome, because there's a survival aspect. And they said that if you can pitch a purpose for why you're doing this, how you can push the beauty of nature into your community, we might give you a residency. And I said, sign me up, that's great. Around that time, you can probably relate to this, I was working on a comic book, and I ended up in the hospital from overexertion. I was put in like 100-hour weeks. That was my energy, right? I was just hustling, right? And then a lot of the early art years is non-sustainable. We all know that, right? You can't just live and just push yourself for art alone. There has to be more. So I'm like, okay, let me apply to this. So the first one I went to was in Sitka, Alaska. And I remember when I was dropped off there, that I'm walking, minding my own business, and I see a tree, and I'm like, well, that's 15 eagles in that tree. And this is a different environment, and that was amazing. And that was about 11 years ago. So those are some photos here. This was great. This was a full wetsuit, so I could go up to here in the water and still stay dry. And for context, I only knew the city, so this was amazing. And this shot, that's a whale blowhole. I'm like, my gosh, maybe I can give it a hug and ride it away. So that was a great experience. And then I put in 10 more years. My career's going pretty decent, and this was right before, actually right after COVID. And I thought, we're probably all feeling really antsy. So I applied again. And I'm going to go through and talk about that experience. But before I start that, A lot of the images that we're going to see up here are from our work in progress pages from a book that I'm putting together. So y'all are going to be some of the first people to see that. Some of the imagery is also unfinished, which you know how painful that is for me, but I thought, just don't tell anybody yet. So this is a blues musician called Keb Mo, and I think it represents the spirit of that experience. And I'm not going to sing it. I'll save you that. No rocket's going to fly that high. There's no escaping the enemy. He's you and I. We poison up our water. We're choking on the air. Last stop before it gets too late. Or is it already too late? Is it already too late for the victims of comfort? Victims of comfort was a fascinating idea. That I would wake up, I would turn the faucet and water would appear. I would use the restroom and it'd be washed away. I would go and there would be a box with my food and I would eat it. And for my whole life, that is just assumed. That's the privilege of America. That's just the comfort that we have. When I went out into Alaska, you had to hang your food in a tree because a bear would eat it. And that was new, right? You had to bury your situations, if you know what I mean. Nothing was given to you. You had to earn it. And I came back to Detroit after the first time, and from this experience, having a new perspective on like where my money is going, what it's paying for, and just the privilege we have in modern society, because that's not the case all over the world, and that's not the case for most of human history. You had to learn a lot of the luxuries we have. And as I'm speaking to you with this magical sound sphere, and we have streaming and all that, right? This is a very new thing for most of human history. We had to live in a much different way. So when this happened, I was given the opportunity to apply to a lot of different experiences. And one of the ones that said you had to most be physically fit for was the Canning River Delta, where you would go up the Canning River for about 4 days. You would float and you would kayak, and then you would live on the bird camp with about 12 to 14 biologists. You would do about 10-mile transects a day. I'll tell you what that means if you're not familiar. And it was just going to be very physically demanding. And so I'm like, that's the one I want to do. That's great. So I was given it, and I was really excited. So this was my sketching materials. It's just a regular pack. It's got a lot of goodies. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. I have it with me if anyone wants to see it. This was all of my equipment, and this would all be put into a variety of different dry bags before the adventure. And the training I went was bear training, and it would say black bears and brown bears, this is what you have to do. Then polar bears, I don't know if I can swear here, so oh nuts. If you encounter a polar bear, and we were going to be in the land where polar bears are very prevalent, so they made it a primary goal that I wouldn't have to encounter that. Then this was another humbling experience. There were intense forest fires when I flew into Fairbanks. I flew in and it seemed like it was, what's the Blade Runner? Because the sun doesn't go down, the sun's always out, and there are forest fires, so I arrive at around 12:30 at night and the sky is red. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So I was supposed to float down the Canning River, but I wasn't able to because the forest fires were rendering the roads inoperable to get to where I needed to. So I just hung out in Fairbanks for a while and enjoyed, believe it or not, their Mexican food and Thai food is very good in Fairbanks. And I just realized that things like fire and all these things really got in the way of transportation and just daily life because it was such rural environments. So eventually they canceled the river float, which was a bummer. But I got an even better gift, and I don't have many slides from here on this, but in that time, I just got to meet the people of Fairbanks. And it's just a rule in life. I'm almost 40 years old. I think making the best of situations is always great, and just lovely people. For instance, just a quick aside, I met a gentleman who was in Fairbanks, and he was driving his mother back and forth to Anchorage, and he had on a vest, and on the vest there was a whole bunch of different patches. And I said, what are those patches? And he says, well, those are all just my gifts, so that everyone can come up to me and know what to talk about. So he put kindness, and he put cats, and he said, this is my friend vest. And I'm like, my gosh. And I met a lot of people there. And Fairbanks is not necessarily a wealthy area, but beautiful people. And even though I had to just wait around for a while, just the human interaction was great. And that's a big development for me. I'm an introvert. Even though I teach, this isn't normal. I just like being by myself. Even today, I delayed coming to this event because I was feeling really cozy in my hotel room. And that was just like another example of like, get out into the world, meet people with kindness vests, right? They're out there. So there's me. It's embarrassing, really trying real hard to look like Top Gun. But I was really excited. I have a giant head, so they almost wouldn't let me on because the helmet was like sitting on like this, really silly. But they had to helicopter me into the area because we weren't able to float and the roads weren't working. So this is around Dead Horse, Alaska, which is on the very, very top, right near the Arctic. And we had like a half-hour window. It was like delay. So we're starting to see some of the sketches here. So some of these were done from life, and some of these were done later in the studio. I did get a waterproof camera, and that's how I was documenting the whole experience. And this was loading up the helicopter. So eventually we did make it into the camp, and I remember it was very fascinating because it was so expansive that I couldn't tell size, and there were these tiny little dots, look like peppers, and I'm like, well, what are those? What's that mold on the ground? And they said, well, that's just caribou. That's a herd of caribou. I'm like, wow, okay, this is not Detroit. So there was constantly those sort of experiences. So this was that's just me sleeping because it was always light outside. And I do have a photo of the camp, I think, yeah, a photo. These are some of the rangers that I was with. This was an actual ranger. They had to stock their rifles on in like a secure section because, protect from the polar bears. Biologists. So we'll get to a photo of the land, but it was very, very desolate. We had just a main hangout area, and then we had our sleeping bags, and you couldn't see anything for forever. So the purpose of the experience was to document the day-to-day, right, and to bring that back to Detroit and share this is what goes on in Alaska. So we would wake up in the morning, and we would have our reheatable food, and I don't know how much reheatable eggs y'all have had, but it's not necessarily the best, but when you're in the middle of the tundra and the Arctic, it's okay. So we would do that, and then we would look at the weather for the day. If it was too overcast, we couldn't go out. We would just have to sit inside of the weather station. That was because if we don't have visibility, the polar bears could come on us without us being aware of it. So that made sense. So when we were inside of the weather station, that's where you see a lot of these different sketches with just people hanging out. And I thought what was really fascinating is that to me, hanging out with all these biologists, that was very exotic. I'm like, wow, you're a biologist. You just got your face in a microscope all the time, right? And then they looked at me and they said, wow, it's an artist. You're exotic. I can't draw a stick figure. Just the regular thing that you hear. And that was also great. Because I got to hear the nuances of their world. So they were just talking, and it's like, yeah, I'm the number 4 birder in Utah. Or like, I'm actually fighting for the number 1 birder in like Montana, and then there's this rascal that keeps like hearing the bird, and I'm tracking it down. Then I would say like, yeah, here's a pen, it's a parallel pen, and it makes a different mark, and we're both like, wow. Like, because this doesn't cross over too much. And but we're the same people. At one point in their lives, they realized that science was something they're passionate about. They found their tribe and they pursued it. I found I like to draw, and I present at LightBox and just hang out with other artists. We're similar, but sometimes we get a little compartmentalized. So that was great. We even watched, I think there was a birding movie with Owen Wilson. Have you all ever seen that one? Watch that with a bunch of birders. They're like, no, that's not how that happened. So that was really exciting, just to get to know them. Rachel actually filmed a documentary on me. If you type my name in YouTube, you can watch it. But she was really inspiring because she had type 2 diabetes, and she was really explaining to everyone how you can live out in the wild because there was no hospitals. So that was wonderful to hear her story. That was her. She actually almost broke her ankle one of the days walking the transects. So that was her waiting outside of camp. Lighting the shoelaces, the tips on fire because they wouldn't go through their waterproof shoes. And at that time, I mean, as you all know, screen tones are the coolest thing ever invented, especially like sticky paper screen tones. So obviously I had to go in there and individually draw each little dot to create that mid-tone on there. So half the time I was in there with my head down just doing that. But these are the group of people. Some of them were professional biologists, some were in school. It was all women, and then Tom. So when I arrived, I'm like, Tom, right, you're kind of on an island out here. And he's like, yeah, I know. It's just waiting, a lot of waiting. And this is the highlight of my presentation, right? So even if you don't think this is funny, please laugh. So my note right here, let's see. So this is 7/8/22 in the weather port. This is heavy-duty fog, so the bird crew is waiting it out, or wading it. I was like, haha, look, I'm clever. So let's talk about that. How did that work? So I was taller as far as the folks there. There were a lot of gals around this height. The reason I'm mentioning that is that there's no more badasses I've ever met in my whole entire life. I'm out there, I'm like, yeah, I go to the gym, I run, half marathons, yeah. And then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna do 10 miles, and a transect is a line that you have to walk, that you're going to study all of the natural phenomena on that line, and then the next day, here's your transect, doop, and then the next day, you're gonna walk that way, right? And they would just document the whole environment like that, looking for small animals. So anyways, you start walking there, and the ground eats your feet. It's like a marsh. So you're taking a step, and it's like... And so this is me walking, dramatic reenactment. So I'm just, I'm feeling good. And then, so the biologists, they're like Iron Men and Iron Woman. They're like... just walking back and forth. And that was really cool because, certain people have perceptions of artists and what we do, this or that, and I had a perception of just being in a laboratory and so on and so forth for biologists. They're not mostly, but a lot of time they're on the field. And these were some of the toughest people that I've ever met. And getting to witness that was really cool and kind of gave a robust idea of what happens in their space. So that's actually the sketch that was on the previous page. So that's what it looked like inside the weather port. Here was one of the challenges of this experience, and how are we doing on time? It was a marsh that was flat as the eye can see. And I am a figurative artist, mostly. So I arrived, and I'm like, okay, I have to sketch things. So I'm standing there. And I legit panicked. It was flat. It was flat. And I was concerned because especially a lot of the other artists, they would do a lot of landscapes. And I did tell them that I'm mostly figurative. I love landscapes, especially if there's landscape artists out here. They're beautiful. But, if I was doing a landscape, it'd be like, there's the horizon and I'm done. So what I had to learn is to see. We're all trying to see. And it was when I went down on the ground did the world open up. And I was able to get some really wonderful photographs and compositions as a result of that. And I think that's our role as illustrators and picture makers and storytellers, is to be able to take any subject matter and to find something fascinating. When I graduated school, I applied to and was accepted to the Repin Institute in St. Petersburg, Russia. I didn't go, but what that's another story for another presentation. But the reason I was interested in them is that they said if you're going to do a still life of a cube, you have to make it your cube. And I'm like, that's the spirit that I like. Like, everything is interesting. Like, I bet you can do a still life of that projector and make it extra dynamic. So that was, I was proud to have finally figured that out, and it was the result of me laying on the ground. And I have this, and that's what I would see on the ground. And I had this moment when we actually went to the top shore of all of Alaska, and I'm standing there, and the whole time I was basically like that, because I found driftwood, y'all, and my goodness, they have driftwood there. Because I've seen water, but they're like, this driftwood came from Russia, this driftwood came from this place, and it was knotty, and it was like moving all over the place, and like Ivan Earle and Sam Weber and all these artists, they could draw some driftwood. So I'm like, I finally found some, and I was pretty excited about that. Watching the biologists tell me all this information about what was inside of this egg by holding it. I'm like, wow. I'm officially a birder because I took this photo. This was fun. So these are the small animal traps. There was a small animal team, and then there was a bird team studying the entire cycle of life there. And we all know this, that there's a circle of life, but for them to say that, like, if this animal isn't doing good, all the way up to like the whales are going to be affected because everything is connected firsthand. Like, I've heard that, right? But seeing that firsthand was amazing. So just some birds. As far as just for some art influenced comments, Sergio Topi. Do we have any Sergio Topi fans out there? Double. It's one of my favorites. He was able to take mark making and make it very, very decorative, or decorative, as my girlfriend would say. And that's what I was looking at when I was starting to, and when I'm continuing to explore birds, is that how can you make all this plumage not just mindless sketching, but perhaps create a pattern? Charlie Harper would do that too, Mark English, so on and so forth. So I was trying to experiment with that. So these are some more pieces that I was playing with at the studio. I still have to do one more pass on this to call it complete. But with my work specifically, where I'm at after 15 years, I'm having like a moment where I'm trying to figure out where things are going to go next. And I hope it's somewhere in here where I stop trying to draw well and I just express. I try to make as many mistakes that only I can solve, and there's no necessary level of polish I'm trying to make. For instance, have y'all ever been working on a piece traditional and you got your art supplies all over the place and you got your coffee that you're mixing up with your Gamasol and you're trying to drink the right one and just everything's a big mess and you're like, my piece is messy, but then you scan it in, it's on your computer and it looks finished? I'm trying to keep that messiness and remember that when this was covered, it felt like it was too loose, but when I present it to y'all, I don't think any of you want your money back. You're probably accepting that this is a final image. So like how I would do this is really inspired by some of my mentors, George Pratt and Kent Williams, is you do a ink drawing, then you put vine charcoal over on top, which creates a nice atmosphere and isn't normally seen with ink, so it creates an interesting texture. Then you put wood varnish on top, which is, Home Depot is your best art material place. Then if you put paint on top of that, it has this really interesting slippery feel. Then you can collage on top. That type of thing, I think, is the spirit that I want to play with. Commercially, a lot of times there's a certain level of polish. So if this is my own work, why do I have to make it clean? Same sort of thing here. There's nothing more satisfying than putting vine charcoal and going and making the bird seem like it's flying away. This one still needs a lot more exploration in the texture on the bottom, but that's a badass photo, huh? That was cool. This gal was a monster. She was sort of the head biologist, and her organization and passion for birds was amazing. So we ended up walking up to about here in the water, and there were just caribou walking past. And I try to remember that when I'm just drawing at my table for like the 4th 10-hour day sometimes at home, that there's that counter to this type of lifestyle, and maybe I shouldn't get up and go for a couple-mile run. So just more pieces. This is also a work in progress. Trying to find my interest in very flat planes, right? Almost working abstractly, and then finding the moment where to put the figures. This was a fun one, actually. Once I finish this one, I think it might cause a new pursuit in my work, a new direction. This one I use a lot of packing tape. Like I frisk it to mask off your piece. I drew these characters, I put frisket, I splattered all the ink wash on here, I cut them out, they're like little dolls, then I put them onto this piece of paper with packing tape, and then I just washed on this tone on the back, and then digitally I'm going to draw in all the grass on the bottom, then collage on all the other animals. This is maybe the most exciting I've ever been in an art making process ever. So if you take marker paper and then compressed charcoal, they resist each other. And there's a texture that Sam Weber, if you know him as an illustrator, if not, check him out, that he would get where it would be simple marks, but would almost feel like bark, right? So I'm in the lab and I'm cooking up, like trying, can you put ink with mask it off with masking tape and apply that, and then fail. Another one fail, another one fail. I'm like, this isn't going good. So eventually I was working on figure drawing stuff previous in the day, and I took compressed charcoal and I made this mark. Oh. And I'm like, uh-oh, what do we have here? And I kept putting on the marks, and for what it's worth, that is what gets me up in the morning to make art. Is that, and we all have different things that get us excited, but instead of rendering this bark straightforward, to be able to hack media together to create that mark in a new way, I think is very exciting. And whether you're working traditionally or digitally, coming up with that unexpected is the most guaranteed way to fight art block. I haven't had art block in quite a while, not because I'm special, but just I've really tried to emphasize at least one part in my process that always creates the unexpected. And when that unexpected exists, you're going to increase your stress, but you're also going to increase your pleasure because you accidentally use compressed charcoal on marker paper and you get a piece like this. I was very excited. And then obviously we've all been there. You make that first mark and the rest of the time is like, don't ruin it. So doing graphite work on more slippery marker paper too. You can put down a mark and then just go like that, and then it smears really nice. That was fun. There's kind of a movement at the school I'm at to just do marker paper drawing with graphite. You can get this really slippery feel. I don't even know what happened on this one, but it was fun. It's just a big log. I have to finish that one too. The bottom's a little too abstract. That was the crew from the helicopter, all the folks that I was working with. Got to get a glamour shot. That was me flying away. Okay, so if you're interested in this book, I'm slowly working on it. It's going to be released through the Fish and Wildlife Service in Alaska in their own locations, but then also independently, I got the licensing for my own version that's going to have some new additions. If you just keep track of me over the next year, I'll probably make an announcement when that's going to be. That's going to be more independent release. Probably next year I'll table here and I'll have it if you end up being around. So that's really exciting. And there'll be some more Q&A time if you have any questions about that experience. But I do want to take a little time here to talk about how do you get yourself into those situations. So there is the main outlet here. It's called Res Artists. It's called Residency Artists. And the exciting thing is it has a really good search engine, and you can type in the location maybe of the residency you want, the type of work that you're doing, the length of the residency. This would be where I would encourage you to start. Here's the reality. is a lot of residencies are predicated on the idea that you're a fine artist. And for me, that was difficult in that most of my stuff was very illustrative. It was figurative. I had some digital elements. And for some of the people that were accepting and agreeing for the residencies, that was a challenge. So just for some figures, when I graduated and I got my first residency, which was with Paul Pope in Florida, if you know Paul Pope, that was a big thing for me at the beginning of my career. I applied to 30 different residencies, and I had 29 no's in a row, and the 30th one was the one that I got. So I do have some tips from that experience if you want to apply to a residency. First is have an amazing artist statement. That's going to be the most important thing, and you're going to want to make it as individual as possible. When I would first start writing artist statement, I would say, my name is Francis, and I have a passion for art, and I like figures, and like all these things, and it's like, well, I bet all of you have the same artist statement. Like, you know, so finding out what that unique aspect that you bring into your work is. So I just got a fellowship in Detroit called the Kresge, which was a big honor, and I had to identify that juxtaposing my Mexican-Irish upbringing alongside growing up in a primarily black culture and exploring the diversity through mixed media usage in my art was a big part of my work. And man, that was hard to get to that sentence. It took 38 years to get to that sentence. But being able to have that individualized artist statement would be the first step. Second is find out what they want out of your participation. So for instance, Voices of the Wilderness, I found out they wanted to connect with people not normally associated with nature. So what I mean is they said everyone in Montana, North Dakota, and Maine knows about our national parks and wildlife refuges, but people in Detroit don't. So in my pitch, my whole thing was I'm going to do a speaking tour around Detroit, which I'm putting together. I did this previous, and I'm just going to talk to people and try to connect people to Alaska. So for their marketing team that was putting this together, they're like, oh yeah, this is the guy that we want. So if you can identify, if there is one, what they're looking for, and then answer that in your presentation, that'll be great. Some of them require you to create a body of work and then show them that body of work afterwards. Some of them, you can do whatever you want. Like I did this one residency in a forest by myself in the middle of Michigan, and yes, I got weird after a while. And I just did a crochet sculpture of a 1/3 scale like human anatomical model, and they didn't care. They said, we're just happy to support a Michigan person. So it kind of depends on the type of residency it is. But artist statement and fulfilling the goal of the residency is going to be the best thing that you could do. And also just in general, I've found that if you don't get things, don't never take it personally. The person could have just had an argument with their partner that morning, and all sorts of things could happen. So if you stay on top of it, I promise you'll get one of the residencies. So res artist. A couple other things to mention. So when I was in school, I didn't necessarily know people like this existed. So this is Heather Heckel. I went to school with her at Ringling, and she just reached out. I just became aware that her practice is that she's an art teacher, but look at the highlighted passage. I have had the honor of being awarded 17 artist residencies through the National Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management. So I was speaking to her, and she said it was her intention to go to every single one. And she's changed her body of work from paper cutouts to more oil paintings. You can go to her website to check it out, on each experience. And I thought that was really fascinating because sometimes we have a bit of a linear or limited idea of what our art career could take us down. So if you really want to explore the natural side of the world, this is someone I think that's taken it way farther than I have. So Heather's great. Super nice. You can reach out to them, and I'm sure they'll give you a little insight on how to pursue that even further. Rest in peace to Legend Deer. Maybe someone in here wants to start this again. Talk to me, seriously, because I think it would be really cool. What is Legend Deer, you ask? Legend Deer was started by one of my mentors, Sterling Hunley, great illustrator. If you're not familiar, check him out also. And similarly, he's really tall. He was a basketball guy, and he was just sick of staying at his desk all the time. So he created an organization of artists that would just go off to natural parks, would go on adventures, and then would stay in like a cabin for 2 days and sketch about the experience. And they did some gnarly stuff. They did some rock climbing and would dangle and sketch while they're rock climbing. They would try to figure out a way to sketch while they're whitewater rafting. It was a really exciting thing. And then, unfortunately, COVID killed the momentum. And if you go to their website, it's not even live anymore. So no disrespect to Sterling, but the fact that this existed, I think, was important for artists because there's people that want that. So maybe someone in here has the spark of motivation to bring something together like this again, and I'm just sharing it with you to put that out into the world, and maybe we can get more Legendeers, and I would be happy to put in some work to make that happen. Okay, so this is a little tangential, but I think important to put out here. So basically what I was doing when I was out there was reportage. It was journalistic illustration where, just armed with my sketchbook and a pen or whatever tool, I was documenting my experience. And especially in the mid-century, that was a huge part of illustration. Sports Illustrated might hit up Bernie Fuchs or someone to go attend Wimbledon or a tennis match or a football match, and they get front court or front field access, and they would document it, and the magazine would publish that art. There were a ton of courtroom artists. That was just like a thing. That was a normal thing. I think now it's much more niche, but I'm putting it out there that the life of just going out into the world and sketching it, there still are opportunities for that. And I'm putting your attention towards Victor, and I'm not going to say this right, Hujas? I tried my best. He's an amazing drawer, but he particularly focused on the same energy, the same type of documenting what's out there in his war illustration. And he's done some spectacular images. Some of them can be almost a little triggering, that's why I didn't put them on here. But I would encourage you to check out his body of work and to know that this still is a thing. I actually just posted on to some of my outlets. The military was looking for former Army folks, military people that would want to volunteer to go out and document the war in their sketches. So they're still making calls for that type of thing. And if you're interested in doing this type of work, and that takes a certain predisposition to want to go and document war. But I think the artist perspective is needed. I would reach out to Victor. Victor is about the top of the game. There's an old website called Drawger where he would blog about his experiences, and he gave a whole history of reportage and war military artists, and it was spectacular. It was amazing. And again, when I was in school, I wish I was more familiar with this type of lifestyle for an illustrator. So that's my experience. I realized that later on in my life, I want to force these type of experiences, and I want to build them into my practice because I love my studio in Detroit, but there's a lot of world to see. And as I move into, is 40 middle-aged? I don't know. It's whatever you want it to be. But as I move into this next decade, I hope to do more of this work because I think illustration in the mid-century Norman Rockwell era, after that, you got your subject and then you went to experience it. I think Howard Pyle would say you would just jump into the picture after it. Frederick Remington, I think, was from New York, and then he moved out west so that he can live with the Native Americans and live amongst those people so he can make authentic pictures about it. And I think because of deadlines, a lot of times we got to get our information from the Googles. And the Googles is cool and it's efficient, but what if you actually experienced it? I think really rich imagery can come from that. So that's my goal. And we are at 15 minutes left. So if you do want to follow me at any of my outlets here, that'd be cool. Say hey.